Okay, we are live today from the Feed Real Institute, and I have a guest with me, Joni Kamlet, and she is from Real Mushroom, and we're going to have a discussion on her role and her view on holistic medicine, how mushrooms play into that. First of all, we will put this live up on YouTube. If you are not able to join live, you'll be able to catch this. You'll want to. We're going to go through a lot of information. Real Mushroom is going to be part of the Feed Real Summit in 2024 in October 5th and 6th in San Diego. So you'll want to keep that in mind and join us for that. But we're going to go ahead and get started. So like I said, Joni is a registered vet tech like myself.
Yep.
So, and where did you end up going to school for your RVT?
I went to Carrington College in Northern California. When I went there, it was called Western Career College, and then they named to Carrington.
Okay. And I got my degree at Purdue. So yeah, a long time ago.
yeah. For me, it was back in 2003, 2004.
Okay. No, I got mine in 82. Yeah, I was one of the first classes.
You win.
5 classes, down at Purdue. So I've been a vet tech for a long time. But you also have your certificate in canine rehabilitation, which is really cool.
Yeah. Which, for those that don't know, it's like a physical therapist for dogs. And so I went to the Canine Rehabilitation Institute. That was back in 2007, and I was lucky enough to do an externship with Dr. Lori McCauley.
Oh, wow.
Up at Tops in Chicago. I spent a week with her, one-on-one, which to this day is one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah, I bet. That's amazing. Yeah, I love following her. So you've also worked in the supplement industry. You worked for Standard Process.
That's right.
And but now you are the Director of Veterinary Education and Outreach for Real Mushrooms. I love the title.
I basically talk about mushrooms and
that's what you do.
About mushrooms and geek out about mushrooms. That's with other.
I love when we can find our niche within our career. Like, for the longest time I did lab animal and I was never comfortable there. And then I got into this nutrition side of things. So I'm thinking you're probably feeling the same way I am with the mushroom part of it. So that's awesome. I love that we find our place.
And who knew? I mean, I really didn't know anything about mushrooms until about 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I was, I loved working for Standard Process and the, Whole Foods and nutrition and Western herbs, because we also represented MediHerb.
Mm-hmm.
But once the mushrooms came along, oh my.
That was your calling.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about this fresh food nutrition. I just can't get enough of it. And I just always am, learning more and geeking out on it, like we like to say. So it's a lot of fun. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started with some questions, but we will entertain questions online if you have any. I'm watching our panel here. So if you have anything come up, please feel free to pop the question in and we'll try to answer it. But let's start out with, how did you get started in the whole holistic journey? From my understanding is you started with your own health. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, exactly. And forgive me, I told, to those in the audience, I told Kate earlier, we've got some wildfires in the area and there's some smoke. So if I'm coughing, it's just due to a little asthma. But I started, so back in 1996, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and my dog, Waffles, she was a Skipperkey, so her name was Joni's Belgian Waffles. I know. She was diagnosed with mammary cancer at the same time. And, leading up to 1996, I knew nothing about integrative medicine or holistic nutrition. In fact, I could not have led a more poor lifestyle. I dropped out of college in my 20s. I did graduate from Bartenders Academy, though, and bartender, and worked bars and restaurants for about a decade. And, a lot of my meals came out of the 7-Eleven, after hours, getting that frozen burrito. So I was not a healthy person. And so when I was diagnosed with the ovarian cancer, and they did surgery and they removed an 18-centimeter cyst. It was the size of a 6-month fetus, and
Wow.
it was huge. But before the surgery, I had said, unless you know for sure it's cancer, don't take anything else out. And because it was cystic, they thought it was not cancer. And so they did the surgery, closed me up. And then a week later, they said, in fact, it was cancer and that they wanted to go back in and do a complete hysterectomy and then figure out what stage. So, which involves taking pieces of tissue, from various parts of your body. So they wanted to stage me from my diaphragm down to my bowel and then do chemo and radiation. And something inside me, like I knew nothing about what I was going to do, but I just kind of said, no, like, no. And honestly, that no is what changed my life and started me on the holistic path.
Wow.
And, I happened to be living in a yoga community where I had kind of escaped from the bars and the whole style moved out into the country to live in a yoga community. And there were a whole bunch of people that did different kinds of modalities, acupuncture and macrobiotic diet and et cetera. And so they took me under their wing, and I was a raw food vegan. You name the modality and I tried it. And at the same time, Waffles had developed this mammary tumor. And so I started kind of doing things with her that I was doing with myself, starting with homeopathy. So I started her on homeopathy, and I also started raw feeding her. So I've been raw feeding since 1996, where, back then there was you go to the store and get your pre-made raw food. There was no Feed Real Institute. There was nothing. There was a company called Sojourner Farms, which is where I get my it was like a grain that you would hydrate and then add the protein to. And,
Okay.
So anyway, Waffles lived another 8 or 9 years. So, she lived to about 17 years old, and I'm still here.
You're still here. That's awesome.
26, 27 years later. So
that's amazing.
And the experience that I had through all of it made me realize that I wanted to go into integrative medicine, and I had no interest in working in human medicine. I've always been an animal lover and very squeamish about human fluids, but fascinated with with animal, like everything related to animals.
I get it. I know. I can do anything with animals, and people are like, well, then, treat this with me. I'm like, no.
Yeah, exactly. And you understand, in the vet clinic, like if there's a weird cyst or something that's about to be popped, we're all like crowding around looking. We want to see what comes out. It's kind of gross, but I think it's also kind of instinctive as well. There must be some sort of a evolutionary reason that we do that.
I know.
But yeah, anyway, so that's kind of what started me on my path, and went to school to become an RVT. And so I went to school at, I was 40. And so I'm going to be 63 in February. And I say this, I try to say this on these, podcasts and events, because folks that are out there that are, that if you're not happy in what you're doing and you're an animal lover, right now there are so many opportunities to get involved in the natural pet health industry, with your wonderful organization being one of them. And a very, very, I can't recommend you guys highly enough. I'm so
thank you. Well, and I agree, because I started all this. I lost my job. My career ended after 32 years, very abruptly. And I was like, now what? And I started looking and searching, and I found the Feed Real Institute, Real Dog Box. And it's sparked so much in me. And I'll be 61 in a week. So, I get it. You can start these new careers all over. You can start your life all over. Believe me, talk to me. I've done it over the last year. So
we're both here as we're representations of what you can do
Right.
You know,
And it's exciting. And I think it keeps us young and happy. And, learning every day. And like you, I'm
absolutely.
sure, are constantly learning new things. And so, yeah, it is really
Fine.
exciting. So in the job with Standard Process, you learned about a lot of other types of supplements. Is that really
Right.
what led you to mushrooms, or how did you get there?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story. So after being, hands-on, worked in hands-on veterinary, and I went straight into integrative. So when I went to school to become an RVT, I worked at one of the first integrative veterinary hospitals in Northern California called Creature Comfort in Oakland. And then went to manage the Canine Rehabilitation Center in Walnut Creek. And that's when, and I'd been using Standard Process for myself for years. And so when I went to work for the Canine Rehab Center, I said, hey, I really want to bring in this line of supplements. There are some wonderful whole food supplements and the herbs from MediHerb. So did that for a couple years, and then basically answered an ad that Standard Process had put out for a veterinary representative for their company. So I accepted that job, and I was the Northern California veterinary representative for Standard Process, and I loved it. I still love the company. And my job entailed basically teaching veterinarians about nutrition and herbs. And, in some cases with integrative veterinarians, it was preaching to the choir. But, back then, this was in 2011, there were many more veterinarians that were not raw feed. It's changing by the minute.
How well were you received by them?
Not always well. Really, it would depend, because, I would go and do, I'm sure you're familiar with the lunch and learns, where you go and you go into a veterinary practice and you bring lunch and you do a presentation. And, the integrative practices, we're very open. And, the thing about integrative practices is it's either a veterinarian and a freestanding, like a lone veterinarian, integrative veterinarian, who's, doing a practice on their own, or maybe two of them, with not a whole lot of community, or they're in a large Western practice and they're the only integrative vet, and they're kind of looked at as, or they were as being a weird one. Yeah. And so when I would go into that type of practice, I would start my presentation, and very often there'd be like 10, 20 veterinarians, maybe that one integrative vet. But, I would start out and they'd have their hands crossed. They're very like, I'm sure if they had fruits or vegetables, they'd be throwing them at my head. But, and I would never, and I still would never put down or negate the type of medicine that they were practicing, or the type of food that they were feeding. I found ways to be inclusive, while also introducing new ways of looking at nutrition. And I would consider it a success if, one or two, or maybe a couple of those veterinarians that were like this, were suddenly the arms are down and they're kind of leaning forward. And what I have found, and I'm sure you've had this experience, is, these veterinarians, and, I revere veterinarians. They're busy. I think
absolutely
it's such a bad rap, very often in the holistic medicine community. And, they're doing the best they can. They're they are trying to do no harm. And this is what they were taught in vet school. But, what I would love is when I would get that Western vet who would reach out. I'd get an email or a call, and they would say, hey, my patient, I had this non-resolving case and I could not fix it for the life of me. And my patient, my client finally got frustrated and went to the integrative vet down the road. That dog's better. Tell me tell me how they did it. Like, tell me about your product. That's the vet that was like gold, rather than like, usually because they just don't have time, or,
Well, I think that's
yeah,
a really good point. These veterinarians are not taught any of this in vet school. And, they have 4 years to learn so much about not just one species like medical doctors, but, at least 9 or 10 that they're learning on. And so with nutrition, I think they've been told, okay, we've got this covered. You don't need to worry about it. And so that's just something off their plate. Well, now, we're telling them, no, this is what you really need to focus on. And it is a hard sell. And it, even with your different supplements and these different holistic modalities, it's hard because they weren't taught that way. And they just don't have time. But my thing is if you come around to us and start working with us and with these different modalities, you're going to have more time because you're not going to see these repeat offenders.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah. So it's this vicious circle that, I'm really trying to get that message out too. So we're doing the same.
Exactly.
Doing the same work here.
It is to y'all because, and it's that non-resolving case that suddenly resolves when instead of just chasing that symptom around by, giving antibiotic or, whatever, you're actually looking at the whole animal. You're addressing it from the inside out, looking at
that root cause,
et cetera, that root cause. And, and then the other side of it is, these veterinarians that have been prescribing, whether it's the science diet or whatever, for 20, 30 years, like they then, even when they come around, they then have to, how do they tell their clients?
Yes.
Okay, I'm changing this up and why, there's we have to give them a little leeway to have that kind of
Absolutely.
Of recognizing when they see that light, that aha moment that they've been suggesting this processed food, which just doesn't make sense. When you look at it from a rational standpoint, like why would you feed processed dried up kibble when you could be feeding
real food?
Exactly.
And I think that's a huge point to make, is that I know I beat myself up over this all the time. Like, why did it take me so long to get to this point? And I'm not dealing with clients, so I understand and I feel for them to have to say, you know what, I was wrong all this time. Let's try this. So what do you think are the most prevalent modalities that we can really be pushing for these veterinarians?
That's a great question. Well, I'm a huge fan of chiropractic.
Okay.
So I have seen, so many cases resolve with chiropractic and not just structural issues, behavior issues, even things like seizures, et cetera. I love acupuncture. I'm a big fan of laser therapy.
Okay.
We had back when I was doing rehab, the class E laser was the laser of choice, and now they've laser therapy has
it's evolved so much.
Yeah. A lot of my thinking is around kind of rehab and which involves a lot of older dogs, recovering from surgery, pain, etc. So I love the CC loop is another really cool device.
Okay.
Pulse electromagnetic therapy. It's a little loop that you can use at home to address pain. But, I really think that nutrition, the most important modality, comes down to what you're feeding. It's really, if you're not addressing diet first, it's, and again, it's like if you're feeding inflammatory foods and then trying to address inflammation, it's like you're putting a fire hose on the body while at the same time
pouring gasoline.
It's like you're pouring gasoline on it. It's like you've gotta stop pouring the gasoline first by looking at the nutrition and feeding non-inflammatory foods that are not full of the AGEs, the advanced glycation products that are, of course, accelerating aging process and causing cancer. So
how do mushrooms play in on all that? So we get that base nutrition, but then there's those that great fungi out there.
Yeah. So so let's move into mushrooms. Yeah. So
Yeah.
mushrooms are fascinating. And I'm not sure how knowledgeable you are about mushrooms. And like I'm really when I left Standard Process and started working for a company that was formulating mushroom products, that's where I had kind of my aha exciting moment. But I want to share that with you. But
I would love to hear that. Yeah.
About mushrooms and nutrition. So I get this question a lot. Are animals are they a biologically appropriate food for, dogs and cats? And all animals eat mushrooms in the wild. So, deer, rabbits, squirrels, slugs, even fish eat fungus off the ocean floor.
Sure.
So, mushrooms are part of the biologically appropriate diet. Mammals kind of are evolutionarily programmed to eat mushrooms. And for example, we have receptors for something called ergothioneine. I don't know if you're familiar with ergothioneine.
No.
It's an antioxidant. And it's probably the most important antioxidant most people have never heard about. And it's going to become more, I think, popular over the next decade. But ergothioneine is so valuable that they're actually trying to make it an essential vitamin. And in mammals, we have ergothioneine receptors, but we don't make it in our bodies.
Right.
And the highest source of ergothioneine is in mushrooms. So, the body is programmed to receive this ergothioneine from mushrooms, and we don't need very much. And the body also holds on to ergo very well. So ergothioneine is anti-cancer. It's great for longevity. It can support cognitive function. There's like a myriad of things that ergo can do. But that's just one of the ways, like when I say that we're evolutionarily programmed to consume mushrooms, ergo is just one example.
Is that found in all mushrooms?
It is. Yes, it is found in all mushrooms. It's in higher quantities in certain mushrooms. And interestingly, one of the highest sources of ergo is in those little button mushrooms that you can buy at any grocery store. So
that's great to know, because I always am looking at those mushrooms, and that's the one you can always find. Sometimes I can find shiitakes and some others, but I always can find those.
And that's the beauty of mushrooms, is that mushrooms, when we're talking about mushrooms from a culinary standpoint and adding them to your pet's diet, they're inexpensive and they're available anywhere. I mean, like I live in, as we were talking before we came on, I'm very rural Virginia, and I'm over a half an hour from the nearest grocery store. There's a Food Lion, and I can go into the Food Lion, and there's a whole mushroom selection, and all of those mushrooms. Another mushroom that's high in ergothioneine is the portobello mushroom.
Oh yeah.
Of the medicinal mushrooms, I believe lion's mane is probably the highest in ergothioneine. But in addition, like when we're talking about just cooking with mushrooms, we can move to mushrooms as far as supplements. But mushrooms, the amazing thing about mushrooms is that they're, of course, food, and we're not really supposed to use the term medicine, but they're food and medicine. They're food, and they're also therapeutic agents.
There you go.
That word. And I have a list. So mushrooms, they're 90% water. So they're low in calories. They're high in protein. They're low in simple sugars and fats.
Right.
They're high in fiber and complex carbohydrates. They have a low glycemic index. They've got a significant amount of protein. So they're very low in they're also rich in all kinds of vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, selenium. A cool thing about mushrooms is if you put them out in the sunlight, like let's say you go to the grocery store and you buy mushrooms, just go ahead and put them out in the sunlight for like a half an hour, 45 minutes before you cook them, and they absorb vitamin D too. So they're a great source of vitamin D.
I had heard that, but I didn't know that you could enhance it by putting them out in the sunlight. That's really cool.
That's pretty cool, right?
Great tip.
Yeah. So, you know, eating mushrooms and, like in most, with most things in the integrative pet industry, there's not a whole lot of clinical studies on the pet side. So very often we have to go to the human side and extrapolate from the clinical studies on the human side. And forgive me, because I took some notes before, because
No
it's hard to
problem.
track all this data. But there was a very, there's been many studies on mushrooms, but they've done some very large population studies on mushrooms and found overall that regular dietary mushroom intake decreases the risk of what they call all-cause mortality. So basically, if you eat mushrooms, you will have a longer life. Basically, if you
Nice.
it will extend your life and extend the amount of time before you die. Basically, as far as cancer, there's there is like 17 studies with 20,000 cases where mushrooms have been shown to lower cancer mortality. There's, often like, fruits and vegetables also can lower cancer mortality. But like on the human side, breast cancer, there's a lot of very interesting info around mushrooms and breast cancer, but there's also some cool studies on mushrooms lowering deaths from prostate cancer. And that study did not include fruits or vegetables. It was just mushrooms.
Mushrooms.
So,
Nice.
yeah, it can lower the risk of dementia and cognitive dysfunction. It can increase athletic performance, support liver disease. There is one veterinary study on shelter puppies who were vaccinated, but because they were in very poor shape when they were vaccinated, they were unable to show, when they were titered, they weren't showing enough of the vaccine. They fed these puppies oyster mushrooms and then retitered them, and the titers had gone up.
Wow.
So, it's got me thinking, like, of course, we want to, however, wherever you are in the whole vaccine world, there are certain vaccines that puppies and kittens starting out, and then,
enhance that immune system, right? Did you integrate mushrooms when you were fighting your own battle with cancer?
I didn't know about them back then.
No, I just wondered if by chance you did. Yeah,
would have had I known. I certainly would have. But like I said back then, like honestly, Kay, mushrooms were not on my radar until 2019. And if it's okay, I want to share a story because it's very cool, and it is and I'm sure I've talked about this numerous times, but it's so incredibly cool. So when I left Standard Process, basically they did some reorganization. Our distributorship in Northern California, Standard Process of Northern California, Standard Process, they made a business decision to do away with the distributorships, and rather than be absorbed by the corporate office, we basically went rogue and we started our own company. And Lee Carroll, who's a medical herbalist who worked with MediHerb, he left MediHerb and he joined us at a company called Aduco. And along with Lee, we started formulating supplements. And Lee was very interested, he still is, in medicinal mushrooms. In fact, I'm sure a lot of people on this call follow the amazing Angela Ardolina. She just released a podcast with Lee Carroll today, which I encourage.
Oh, wow. Great.
Because he's my teacher, mentor, and Angela is studying with him as well. Awesome. But Lee was very interested in mushrooms, and it's one of the reasons he had left his former company. And I got involved in product formulation, but then once the product was ready, it was my job. I was the vet rep, and I was going to be teaching veterinarians how to use these new mushroom products. And there was one particular product that had lion's mane in it. And so when I was doing I started reading clinical studies on lion's mane so that I could figure out how to support, my veterinary my veterinary accounts. And I read a study about the ability of lion's mane to support the regeneration of the myelin sheath. And I'm sure you've worked with dogs with degenerative myelopathy. DM, for those that don't know, it's the most tragic disease. It happens very often in certain lines of dogs. Corgis, boxers, German Shepherds, Pit Bulls are some of the breeds that have a higher incidence of degenerative myelopathy. And basically the myelin sheath, which is the kind of the covering of the spinal cord, starts to wear away. And dogs, the first signs is when dogs, they start to have trouble walking. And it will manifest as something called knuckling, where, a dog like this is their paw normally, they kind of walk on the top of their foot or to walk on their knuckles. So that's often one of the first signs of degenerative myelopathy. Unfortunately, the only way, well, although there are tests, there are more recently there are tests, but back when I was in rehab, the only way to determine it was through autopsy. And so you would a lot of things out, and then you would basically determine that it was most likely DM. But I dealt with a lot of these dogs in rehab, and slowly the dog loses the ability to walk, and they lose fecal continence, and it slowly moves up the body. And so when I read about lion's mane and this ability to support this regeneration, I got very excited about the ability of lion's mane and its potential to support these DM dogs. So when the product came out, I sent bottles to all my rehab vets. There were about 15 of them. And I said, give this product to try it out with your DM dogs and let me know. And so like a month later, I checked in with them and some of them got back to me sooner, and some of them had, very promising feedback. Others didn't see much difference. And for those who have dogs with DM or have treated dogs with DM, it's unfortunate because a dog can seem to be doing better and then they slide. There doesn't seem to be any form or function to it. So those mixed results kind of told me that, okay, I'm not seeing a whole lot of difference. But the cool thing was that none of the pet parents wanted to return the product. And in fact, they wanted more of it. All of the dogs were showing cognitive changes, positive changes, and degenerative myelopathy. It happens in dogs. These are older dogs. And so I'm like, okay, what do you mean cognitive changes? And they're like, the vet started telling me specifically, this dog found the dog door where this dog hasn't been able to find the dog door for 6 months. This other dog's making direct eye contact with its owner. Another dog used to get lost in the living room, couldn't find their way around the furniture. He's now moving around the furniture, not vocalizing at night. All these symptoms of canine cognitive dysfunction or doggy dementia. So that got me very excited. And so I arranged a study group with these vets, and so that we could kind of go over these findings. And, and again, I'd been working in the whole food industry, supplemented for a decade at that point. This is the first time I've ever had every single vet that attended express positive feedback about the product. It was like every single one of them. And I kept saying, are you sure? Are you sure? Tell me what it was. And that was my aha moment. That was it. I was like, my gosh, that's just one mushroom. Like, what can other mushrooms do? And so that is what was my wake-up call. And this story that I just told you, I actually presented at AHVMA in 2022. I shared the story of this group of veterinarians, and I gave a talk on lion's mane and cognitive function. And so I would recommend, here's the recommendation. Anybody with an older dog and any human, I would recommend taking lion's mane. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful mushroom. Interestingly, it was traditionally used for digestion, for ulcers and IBD. And it's only recently, like in the 90s, that they discovered its effect on nerve growth factor, other things related to neurologic health. And so, and I would say mushrooms in general are not acute use products. It's more like you take mushrooms daily and
Hmm.
either
They'll
you
maintain. Yeah.
add a kind of a vigilance and a vitality to the system. But
Right.
in the case of lion's mane, these people were saying, like, they were reporting changes pretty quickly, like
That's
within
awesome.
2 weeks. So I never my motto is to under promise and over deliver. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am hesitant to give that, that
Hmm.
because I don't want somebody to try it and say it's been 2 weeks and nothing's happened.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's
Can I give a fun side note on lion's
really,
mane? So my granddaughter goes to a natural school, and they do stuff outside, and they're learning. It's a 1 day a week, like, daycare kind of. It's more pre-K, kindergarten level. And she came home one day and they had learned about mushrooms. And so we were talking about different ones. And I said, "Did you learn about lion's mane?" And she said, "Yes. But did you know there's another name for it?" And I said, "There is." And she said, "Yes, Santa's beard." Had you heard that? I hadn't heard that
yes, yeah.
before. If you look at it, it
There's
makes
all kinds
sense.
of cool names for,
Yeah. So
like the monkey head fungus. There's in my PowerPoint, I have like 20 different names for
it's so fun.
Lyme, of course.
So yeah, in my mind, lion's mane is Santa's beard. So
I love it. I love it.
yeah.
It does look like it
Hmm.
it could definitely look like a beard. I found my first lion's mane last year, which was
Oh,
very
exciting.
exciting. And
Like I said earlier, yeah, I have no idea what's growing on my new property because I have 3 acres of woods. So I'll be out there looking around.
we
I'll be calling you, Joni.
what we're gonna have to do is we'll exchange phone numbers and you
Yes,
send me pictures, like
absolutely.
pictures, which I can't tell you how many pictures I get a day of saying, "What is this? Tell me
Yes,
what it is." And I'm like,
definitely.
it's an LBM. It's a little brown mushroom." Because I mean,
I'll probably have lots of those.
there's so many thousands of mushrooms out there, and
That's so exciting. Well, I
yeah.
have a question that I'd like to put on here. It is thoughts on using mushrooms for this mysterious disease that we're seeing in respiratory disease. Oh,
Absolutely.
wait, I went to the wrong one. Sorry. On using mushroom to help prevent dogs from contracting this mysterious respiratory disease.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Hey, Ruby. No, I absolutely think that mushrooms are key to supporting around this respiratory illness.
Hmm.
All mushrooms are immune modulating. They're
Okay.
anti-inflammatory.
Hmm.
There are specific mushrooms, for instance, cordyceps, which has an affinity for the lungs. So, I would be, like you know, from our line, I would be doing 5 defenders, which is a blend of 5 different mushrooms:
Hmm.
chaga, reishi, shiitake, turkey tail, and maitake. They have 3 mushrooms that shiitake, maitake, and reishi, which I like to call the Holy Trinity because
Okay.
there's a clinical study that was done showing that those mushrooms in synergy work better together than
Mm-hmm.
individually.
And individually, huh?
I would be doing. I love using combinations of mushrooms together
Hmm.
because that ability for them to it kind of heightens the
Hmm.
effectiveness of the mushroom.
Synergistic effect, yeah.
Yeah, I would be on a proactive daily, uh, 5 defenders, or from another brand, a
Sure.
blend of a mushroom blend, and then I'd be looking into cordyceps for
Okay.
sure. Reishi is also good for the lungs. They're just the way I look at mushrooms is that they they're insurance for your immune system.
Mm,
And, for
love that.
those, this might be a good time to give a very basic explanation of how and why mushrooms work.
Absolutely.
It goes back, how many million years? It goes back like 400 million years.
Wow.
So we've got to go like way back to where we were like, we didn't even exist. It was
Right,
just
right.
primordial ooze. And there were all these pathogens and toxins and molds and, whatever,
Mhm.
imagine 400 million years ago, and are the earliest ancestors of, our earliest ancestors were the sea sponges.
Right.
And those sea sponges, they developed whatever kind of rose out of that ooze, developed their immune systems in a way that they had the ability to withstand all those pathogens. And some of those were fungal pathogens. And so fast forward to the modern day, our DNA remembers that. And by the way, we share over 30% of our DNA with mushrooms, which is like, that's just insane, But so when we ingest a mushroom, and any kind of mushroom, and all mushrooms that are safe for humans are safe for dogs and cats. So that's an important point to make. When we ingest them, the body has that, our DNA remembers that at one time, basically that this might be a threat. It's not a threat, but it could be.
Right.
So the message the message comes from the beta glucans in the mushrooms, among other things. But it says that this could be a threat. So are you ready? It's time to up your game. And so I liken it to soldiers. At reveille, they're asleep, and the horn reveille.
Okay.
They get out of bed and they make their bed, and it's nice, and they've got the hospital corners, and they get all dressed up in their uniforms, and they line up and salute. And so there's no threat, but they're ready should something happen.
They're ready.
And so going back to this respiratory illness, that's what the mushrooms are going to do in the system, is going to prepare the body for whatever threat, whether it's viral, whether it's bacterial, whether and turkey, just one mushroom, turkey tail, has antiviral properties. It also has anti-cancer properties, but they're like, mushrooms just do such a myriad of things that so that's the long answer to the question, but I would definitely be using mushrooms proactively.
Nice. Good to know.
Yeah.
So I know you hear all different ways that you should be presenting mushrooms to your dog. So if you go to the grocery store and you're able to find some of these, what's the best way to get those into the dog?
So it's important to cook your mushrooms. That's the number one thing. If we're talking about culinary mushrooms, rather than, mushroom supplements, the reason being that, and there's nothing, it's not going to hurt a dog or a human to eat, uncooked mushrooms.
Okay.
The medicinal qualities of the mushrooms are kind of trapped in the mushroom wall, which is made of chitin. And chitin is, it's the same substance that makes up the exoskeleton of an insect. So it's that kind of hard shell of an insect. Mushrooms also contain chitin. And it's one of the reasons, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of like mushrooms that have pushed up through concrete and stuff like that. They're very strong. And so the chitin's almost like rebar. And the medicinal qualities of the mushrooms are kind of, I guess, they live in that chitin wall. So by heating the mushroom, it releases that medicine. And so you're going to want to cook them. And one way that I love to give mushrooms to pets is in a bone broth. So if you bone broth, just toss the mushrooms in there.
Great idea.
But you can also just steam mushrooms. You can, if you're making mushrooms for yourself, add them to your pet's bowl. I have to confess, I don't cook much. I'm a terrible. So probably somebody else could give you some amazing recipes. Although I did send you an ebook, which I'm happy to share with folks if they'd like some nice mushroom recipes that I didn't put together. But
good to know.
Whatever healthy oil you want to use to saute them, you can steam them, you can boil them, you can add them to bone broth would be would be best. And,
Great.
you can feed them whole, you could chop them, the mushrooms, they're very high in fiber, which makes them a great prebiotic.
Right.
But, you might want to chop them up to make them just easier on the digestion. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I found shiitake mushrooms when I was searching for all my ingredients for my turkey dressing this year, and I chopped them all up and put them in the dressing, and it turned out so good. So.
And one thing about shiitake, there's a crazy on the human side. I don't know, I actually have never heard anything about pet allergies with shiitake, but raw shiitake, there's a raw shiitake allergy with humans that certain members of the human population react to raw shiitake really badly, and it causes a painful and itchy rash all over the body. So don't eat raw shiitakes.
Yeah, no, I usually cook. I mean, I always cook them, but that's good to know.
A little back for you humans out there.
Exactly. Well, and you have to wonder, will it do the same with dogs too? So
yeah. I don't know. Again, they're just with mushrooms in general, we're just cracked the tip of the iceberg with all the things that mushrooms can do. I mean, there's 6.2 million varieties of fungus, and that includes yeast and molds. Yeah.
Amazing.
And yeah, that's unbelievable. And of that, I think, 35,000 or so are what's called macrofungi, which is, fungi that you could see with the naked eye.
Right.
Then when you think of how many of that amount we're cooking with, and that amount, how many, maybe a dozen that we're using medicinally.
Right.
So, there's so much to discover about mushrooms and what they can do that I think a decade from now, we're gonna be talking about, a dozen more medicinal mushrooms, including psilocybin, which is huge and we're going to be hearing about it more and more with pets. I think there's a tremendous place for very low doses called
microdosing
with animals. And I do know of some vets that are,
That's
that are working with psilocybin with military dogs coming back. Dogs have PTSD as well. And it's
interesting. Well, that brings us to this question. Do you generally recommend mushrooms for reactive or anxious dogs? So that just loops us right in.
Yeah, I would. Two that come to mind are reishi and lion's mane. So lion's is just great for the brain, anything related to, the brain, cognition in general. It also has calming qualities, but reishi has always been known as it's the mushroom of immortality, but for thousands of years, it's been used by monks in Asia to support meditation practice.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
On the human side, take a couple reishi at night and you'll have a very deep and restful sleep. So
I need that.
Are into our products, but we have a product, our mushroom relax chews have the two mushrooms that are in our relax chews are lion's mane and reishi, along with some other ingredients. Yeah.
Interesting. So you feel like in general, just to be providing these supplements to the dog is going to add, you don't have to wait for something to come up. It's going to.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, isn't that true for holistic medicine in general? I mean,
absolutely right.
Nutrition is I think we've finally gotten past, again, going back to when I started out working in holistic pet hospitals, every patient we saw was what we called the last chance dog. They'd been everywhere else. They had a heart an inch thick and they showed up because we were the last resort. So much better if we're proactively feeding and also giving, mushrooms and, mushrooms. It's important to think of mushrooms. They're basically functional foods. So mushrooms, not an herb, it's not a plant. Mushrooms are their own kingdom. So whether you're giving mushrooms as whole mushrooms and, as a culinary item, cooking with it, or you're supplementing, you're still basically giving a functional food that also happens to have medicinal qualities. So I think every animal from puppies all the way up to geriatric would benefit from being on mushroom for that kind of health insurance that we're talking about. Yes.
So when you're looking at mushroom supplements, are there specific things we should be leery of? We should be watching? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's move into the wild west of mushrooms.
Yes.
Yeah. So we call ourselves real mushrooms because we are actual mushrooms. Our products contain actual mushrooms, and we can go to the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of a mushroom is the above ground part of a fungus.
Yes.
So when you think about a fungus, there's three parts. There's the mushroom, which is that above ground part. There's the spore, which is the reproductive part of the mushroom that above ground part, it grows and then it releases the spore to the ground where it connects with other spores, the mycelium, which is the underground part of the mushroom. And even though it's not a plant, the closest it can be compared to would be like the roots of a plant or a tree. No, it's totally not that.
Okay.
So when you're looking at mushroom supplements, and mushrooms they're not very easy to grow. They're very, mushrooms have their own consciousness. I mean, they can be a little finicky, and they need ideal conditions, and they can take sometimes 3 to 6 months before that mushroom, and people also call it the fruiting body, pops up above ground, and they need a lot of space. And a lot of mushroom companies, they can't afford to wait 3 to 6 months for that. And so most companies, and unfortunately it's the truth that most companies, this is how they do it. They take that spore and they inject it into a substrate, and that substrate could be like a block of rice or a block of oats, and they inject it in there, and that mycelium, when the conditions are good, grows very quickly. And so that mycelium, what happens is it's like little fingers that are growing all throughout that block of rice or grain. And maybe a few actual mushrooms will pop up, but for the most part, you're talking about mainly that mycelium on grain. So we call it mycelium on grain, or MOG, M-O-G.
Okay.
And what happens is that many companies will take that mycelium on grain, and there's no way to separate the mycelium from the grain that it's growing on. So what they do is they dry that block up and grind it up, and they call it a mushroom. And it's not a mushroom. And so, and to be clear, I'm not talking about the quality of these products, because I've heard from many people who benefit from taking these mycelium on grain products, and that's great. What I'm addressing is the transparency of having a picture of a mushroom on a bottle when you're selling a product that is MOG. It would be like me saying, "Hey, Kay, would you like an apple?" and giving you the root of an apple tree. It to me, that I would feel like I was not, like that wasn't above board.
Right.
So we did, actually, Dr. Rob Silver, my amazing mentor who I work with, we did a study where we ordered 10 mushroom products off of Amazon. What they all had in common was that they were labeled veterinary and that they had turkey tail in them. We couldn't find 10 just single turkey tail veterinary products. They just don't exist out there.
Right.
So they were like products that had like turkey tail and maybe some other mushrooms in them. But they were all mushrooms.
Okay.
He said.
Right.
And we ordered them. We sent them up to our offices up in British Columbia, and they were blinded. The white paper covering the labels so that the lab couldn't see what they were. And they were sent out to an independent lab and tested for what you're looking for. So mushrooms should be high in beta glucans. Beta glucans are one of the ways that you measure the quality of a mushroom. There are other ways, but a benefit of beta glucans is it's something that can be measured. And alpha glucans indicate starch. So what you want is that the product is high in beta glucans and low in alpha glucans.
Sure.
And of the 10 products, 6 of them came back high in alpha glucans, low in beta glucans. One had 66.6% alpha glucans and maybe 4% beta. And, the thing, and some of these products, they didn't even list that there was grain or mycelium on the label. It just listed mushrooms. So you have a dog that maybe has cancer and is on a ketogenic diet, and that pet parent researches mushrooms and goes out and gets a mushroom product, and they don't know that they're feeding starch to their pet.
Right.
And I will say, I'm not going to name names, but I will say most, like for instance, in the Whole Foods market, most of the mushroom products in Whole Foods market are mycelium on grain products. So buyer beware. Look at the, unfortunately, sometimes you can't tell from the ingredients because they don't list them. Reach out to the company and ask them.
Right.
But one thing is, if it says that it has mycelium in there, it's got grain as well. Grain. So
that's really good to know, because like you said, there's so many products out there, and you start looking, and it's really hard to tell. It's really, really glad we covered that.
Yeah, and I will say there like that, it's one of the reasons that a lot of companies are making tinctures, because it's a way to get past this. What I'm talking about is powdered products. The tinctures don't have to deal with this mycelium on grain issue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the liquid tinctures. Yeah.
So what do you think is the best way should it be powder or tincture, or does it matter? As long as you know what the product is.
I think it depends. I think the most important thing is knowing the product. It's hard for me, I'll just put it this way, Kay, like I work for Real Mushrooms, because I think that they are doing it better than anybody else. The Real Mushrooms is the, I guess, is the child of Namex. They're the retail side of Namex, which is North American Medicinal Mushroom Extracts, which was started by Jeff Chilton back in the 90s. And so, almost about 30 years of growing mushrooms and studying mushrooms and perfecting our technique. And Namex supplies mushroom extracts to supplement companies around the country. And then Jeff's son Sky started Real Mushrooms about 8 years ago. And then the veterinary line started about 2 years ago, because so many veterinarians and pet parents were using our products for their pets. And then that's why they brought me and Dr. Silver on board. Actually, I begged them to hire me. I was working my mushroom obsession just took me down such a rabbit hole that I just didn't want to talk about anything else. And
that's so awesome.
That was like, I don't want to talk about, quercetin. I love it, but I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it. That's great. No, I think it's amazing how we can, like I said earlier, find our niche in our field. And it's so obvious that your passion is mushrooms, and that it's so and that's great. And it's so good to learn that we have these options for our dogs, and to think of the longevity. I mean, that's exactly what we want, right? We want our dogs to live for a long time and be with us as long as we can, but also have quality of life. And that's what it sounds like this is going to help with their quality of life.
Yeah. I mean, there's no downside. That's the way I look at it, is like, at the very least, you're giving your dog, you're supplementing their nutrition with a functional food. And, at the best, you might be, lowering the risk of cancer, or supporting them during cancer, or, delaying the onset of cognitive dysfunction, et cetera.
Yeah, so, exactly. Well, and I think that's why it works so well with feeding whole foods. And
Yeah.
that's what we always talk about, is not only do we want to feed whole foods as their foundation, but anytime you can supplement with whole foods
Right.
and have functional foods,
Exactly.
then, you know, you're keeping it all natural and all good.
Yes.
So that's really exciting. I've learned so much. I've been reading, I just updated our article on medicinal mushrooms. And so I prepped for this and was really excited. And I just, yeah, this is a great, great addition to what we're talking about and how we want to supplement dogs' meals with whole food, with functional foods.
Yeah.
So it's a great way. Yeah.
And always, I mean, if you need, I mean, we've got tons of educational material, data, anything, you know, if you have questions or anything.
Right.
I mean, so I know you're an amazing researcher, so
That's what I do. So where can people find you?
So www.realmushrooms.com, REAL mushrooms. We also we have a Real Mushrooms for Pets Facebook page, and once a month, Dr. Silver and I do a Facebook Live, so you can come on and ask us any questions about mushrooms. We've also, you know, we're on Instagram. We're kind of all the socials. But I'm gonna, and if you know anybody has any specific questions for me, it's Joni, Joni at realmushrooms.com.
Perfect.
Feel free to reach out to me. Yeah.
That's excellent. Well, this has been great. An hour flew by. I really, really enjoyed talking with you, and I will definitely get your number so we can exchange photos when spring comes and I'm going out in my yard and looking at everything and checking it out. Like I said, I haven't even been past the fenced area, so
oh my gosh,
I'm excited. Yeah,
you're gonna find all kinds of cool stuff.
I think so. So all right, well, thank you so much, Joni, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.
You too. Bye-bye, everybody.